In 1973, Raymond Hail and his 12-year-old daughter, Emily, entered the 7th Precinct Police Station in Brookhaven, seeking protection. Raymond was scheduled to testify against a powerful union boss, but what happened next remains one of the most chilling mysteries in FBI history. The cameras caught them entering the lobby at 9:14 p.m., but after that, nothing. No exit footage, no paperwork, nothing but silence. They vanished, leaving behind a trail of questions that would go unanswered for decades. Was it the mob? Was it a cover-up? What really happened to the Hales inside a building that was supposed to protect them? Join us as we uncover the shocking evidence that stunned the country and forever changed the investigation. Subscribe to Untold Secrets Daily and leave a comment below. What do you think happened to the Hales? On the evening of March 18, 1973, Raymond Hail and his daughter, Emily, walked into the 7th Precinct Police Station in Brookhaven, seeking safety. Raymond, a construction foreman, had agreed to testify against Vincent Duca, a powerful union boss with deep ties to the city's corrupt underworld. With his wife bedridden and unable to protect their daughter, Raymond took Emily with him that night, hoping the police could offer the security they desperately needed. As they entered the station's lobby at 9:14 p.m., their faces were caught on camera. But what followed remains a haunting mystery. The footage shows them briefly conversing with an officer before they were escorted down the hallway toward the interrogation rooms. From that moment on, they disappeared without a trace. No exit footage, no reports, and no sign of their departure. What started as a routine visit to seek protection from the authorities would become a case that baffled the FBI for decades. Was it a kidnapping orchestrated by the mob, or was something more sinister at play? The disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hail would come to be known as the Hail case, a case that would remain unsolved for 26 long years. The only thing certain was that the police station, a place meant to ensure safety, had become the site of one of the most chilling disappearances in history. The disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hail didn't go unnoticed for long. As soon as the local police realized that both had vanished without a trace, the FBI was called in. It seemed like a straightforward case at first, father and daughter seeking protection from a powerful mob figure. Surely the police would know what happened to them. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this was no ordinary missing persons case. FBI agents immediately began scouring the 7th Precinct for clues. They combed through the surveillance footage, but what they saw was both troubling and baffling. At 9:14 p.m., Raymond and Emily entered the building, but after that, the footage cut off. No exit footage, no sign of them leaving the premises. In fact, it seemed as though they had simply vanished from the station's interior without a single trace. The agents interviewed officers who had been on duty that night, but every statement seemed to contradict the others. Some officers claimed they had seen Raymond and Emily escorted down the hallway toward the interrogation rooms. Others insisted they never saw them leave the lobby. It was as if the father and daughter had simply disappeared into thin air. The initial FBI report was frustratingly thin. It stated that Raymond was supposed to testify against Vincent Duca, a powerful and dangerous union boss involved in money laundering schemes. But as time passed, the investigation grew colder. The Hales had vanished, and there were no signs of foul play or struggle. The police department's official story was vague, simply labeling the case as a missing persons investigation. As days turned into weeks and then months, the case began to gather dust. But the FBI refused to let it go. They expanded their search for the missing Hales, tracing every lead, every possible sighting, but came up empty-handed. It seemed like the father and daughter had been swallowed up by the very system meant to protect them. For years, the case went unsolved. The FBI's involvement in the case was deemed a failure. Raymond's testimony against Duca never happened. Duca, who had been implicated in numerous criminal activities, was left unchallenged. The Hales' disappearance was relegated to the list of unsolved mysteries, lingering in the back of people's minds as just another case that slipped through the cracks. However, Detective Lena Ward, assigned to review cold cases years later, was determined to dig deeper. She revisited the Hail case, knowing there had to be something they had missed, some clue buried under years of silence. Lena was struck by the fact that there were no official records of Raymond and Emily ever checking in that night. But there was footage. There was evidence. The contradictions gnawed at her, urging her to dig deeper. One thing stood out to Lena. Everyone who had been on duty that night seemed to be hiding something. Officers, once questioned, either claimed not to remember anything about the Hales' arrival or gave conflicting stories. Some even seemed nervous when pressed further, as if they were guarding a secret. It didn't take long for Lena to suspect that there was more to the case than anyone had initially believed. It wasn't just the disappearance of a father and daughter. It was something far darker, something buried within the walls of the precinct itself. As Lena uncovered more documents and interviewed more witnesses, she began to feel the weight of a cover-up. Someone was silencing the truth, and as much as she dug, she kept hitting dead ends. Yet, the deeper she went, the more she realized that the Hales' disappearance was tied to something much larger than one family. It was connected to the web of corruption that had plagued the city for years. As Lena reviewed the case in greater detail, she came across an anonymous tip that would change everything. A retired officer claimed that he had seen something strange the night the Hales disappeared, something that had never made it into any official report. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. But the truth, as Lena would soon discover, was far more shocking than she could have imagined. Detective Lena Ward had already watched the surveillance footage from the night of March 18, 1973, more times than she cared to count. But each time, she hoped something new would appear. A flicker, a shadow, a reflection that would provide the clue she so desperately needed. But every time, the footage ended the same way. Raymond and Emily Hail entered the lobby at 9:14 p.m., and after that, nothing. The camera in the lobby captured them walking through the doors, their faces tired but determined. Raymond's hand was firmly clasped around Emily's, and her face, pale and wary, seemed to convey the weight of what was about to happen. She clutched his hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. As they approached the front desk, an officer, his face turned away from the camera, briefly spoke with them. The usual paperwork was filled out, and then they were led down the hallway toward the interrogation rooms. But that was where the footage cut off. For years, this was the last piece of tangible evidence the FBI had in the case. The grainy, distorted video showed the Hales entering the precinct, but there was no footage of them leaving, no report of them checking out, no sign of their exit. The last time anyone had seen Raymond and Emily was in that dimly lit hallway, escorted by a uniformed officer. And then silence. Lena leaned closer to the screen, watching the footage again, hoping that she had missed something in all of her previous viewings. But the reality was inescapable. The Hales had simply vanished from the station. No one saw them leave. No one heard anything unusual. It was as if the building had swallowed them whole. The grainy footage of their arrival had been one of the key pieces of evidence in the case. But now, Lena began to question whether the video was all they had. The more she watched, the more she began to wonder if the footage was carefully edited or tampered with. Could there have been more footage that was deliberately erased? Had someone within the department been involved in making sure the truth never saw the light of day? Lena's growing unease pushed her to dig deeper into the precinct's records. She reviewed the logs of every officer who had been on duty that night, hoping to find some discrepancy. But every lead seemed to end in a dead end. There was no exit record for the Hales, and no one could recall seeing them leave. Officers who had been on duty that night gave conflicting reports. Some swore they had seen Raymond and Emily being escorted toward the interrogation rooms. Others claimed they had left without incident, only to disappear from everyone's memory like a ghost. But there was something about this case that stuck with Lena. It wasn't just the lack of evidence. It was the way the entire precinct seemed to be trying to erase the Hales' existence, as if no one wanted to remember them. The lack of video footage, the conflicting statements, the silences, all of it spoke to a cover-up far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As Lena dug deeper, one thought kept nagging at her. If the Hales had truly disappeared into thin air, who stood to benefit from their silence? The more Detective Lena Ward dug into the case, the more she began to uncover inconsistencies that raised serious questions about what had really happened to Raymond and Emily Hail. It was as if the official reports were deliberately crafted to hide the truth, or worse, to erase it entirely. The first red flag appeared when Lena reviewed the police logs. According to the official report, Raymond Hail and his daughter had never checked in at the front desk. Yet, the grainy surveillance footage clearly showed them entering the building, with Raymond speaking briefly with the officer at the desk. How could there be footage of them entering, but no record of their arrival? The contradiction was glaring, and it wasn't the only one. Lena discovered another oddity when she looked at the witness statements. Several officers had been on duty that night, but when questioned about the Hales' disappearance, their accounts varied drastically. Some officers claimed that they had escorted Raymond and Emily to the interrogation rooms, while others couldn't even recall seeing them at all. It was as if the entire night was shrouded in a thick fog of confusion, with no one willing to answer the difficult questions. The most troubling discrepancy, however, came from a report buried deep in the archives. Lena found a second document, an unsigned report, that stated Raymond Hail had never even checked in at the precinct. This report contradicted both the video footage and the statements from the officers who had been on duty. The second report simply erased the Hales from the equation altogether, suggesting they never existed within the station's walls. This was not just a minor mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of removal, designed to scrub them from the system entirely. Lena's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of information. It was becoming increasingly clear that something wasn't right inside the precinct. Someone, or several people, had made a concerted effort to make sure Raymond and Emily's disappearance remained a mystery. But why? Who stood to gain from their silence? It wasn't just the conflicting statements and the missing paperwork. It was the way the case was treated from the very beginning. As Lena dug deeper into the history of the precinct, she found a pattern of cover-ups, forgotten files, and mysteriously altered reports. It was almost as if the precinct had a long-standing tradition of erasing its own mistakes and its own dirty secrets. The deeper Lena went, the more she realized that this case was no longer about just a missing father and daughter. It was about corruption, conspiracy, and a system designed to protect its own, no matter the cost. And the deeper Lena went, the more she found herself questioning just how far this cover-up stretched. Was it the mob? Was it the police? Or was it both, colluding to make sure the truth never saw the light of day? The more she uncovered, the more she realized the only thing that had been erased faster than the Hales' disappearance was the truth. As Detective Lena Ward continued to peel back the layers of the Hail case, the investigation began to take an unexpected turn. What started as a simple missing persons case soon spiraled into a web of suspicion and intrigue. The more Lena uncovered, the clearer it became that the Hales' disappearance was not just an isolated incident, but part of a larger, darker story that involved more than just the police department. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside the department was involved in the cover-up. The contradictions in the reports, the erased footage, the absence of any record of Raymond and Emily's exit, all pointed to one thing. Someone was making sure the Hales didn't make it out alive. But who? The investigation into the officers on duty that night was frustratingly inconclusive. Some of the officers had conflicting recollections of what happened, and others seemed genuinely unaware of the details surrounding the Hale's disappearance. Yet, when Lena pressed harder, she began to notice a strange pattern emerging. Certain officers had been consistently uncooperative. One officer, Sergeant Thomas Greaves, seemed to know more than he was letting on. When Lena tracked him down, she could see that he was hiding something. The moment she mentioned the Hale case, his face changed. His eyes darted nervously toward the door as if looking for an escape. He had been on duty that night and had witnessed the Hales entering the precinct. But when pressed about their whereabouts after that, his answers grew vague. "I was in the bullpen when they came in," Greaves had told her, his voice low and unsteady. "I remember because it was late, close to the end of my shift. But after that, I don't know what happened." The whole place felt tense that night. There were whispers in the corners, and the captain had locked himself in his office. It wasn't normal for a routine witness escort. Lena pushed further, asking him what happened next. "I didn't see them leave," Greaves had replied. "I remember looking up an hour later, and they were just gone." Greaves' admission sent a chill through Lena's spine. He had been there, and yet he claimed to have seen nothing. It was as if Raymond and Emily had evaporated into thin air. But the most alarming part of Greaves' statement was the way he spoke about the atmosphere that night. Tense, secretive, with people whispering in corners. It was a red flag, and Lena couldn't ignore it. She had been investigating for too long to dismiss this as coincidence. Lena's gut told her that Greaves was more than just a bystander. He had been there, and he knew something. But what? She pushed him harder, asking if he thought anyone inside the department had been involved in the disappearance. His answer was cryptic. "If you ask the wrong questions, your shift gets changed. Your desk gets moved to the basement. Or worse." It was clear that the precinct had been a place where asking questions could get you into trouble, where silence was bought and sold. As Lena dug deeper into the department's history, she discovered more disturbing truths. There were whispers about a secret network of officers, some with ties to the mob, who had been running the precinct for years. The department's leadership had been filled with people who turned a blind eye to corruption, and some even profited from it. The disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hail wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader culture of silence and complicity. But the more Lena uncovered, the more dangerous things became. She could feel eyes on her at every turn. She was treading on ground that was far more treacherous than she had anticipated. The closer she got to the truth, the more resistance she encountered. It wasn't just the department that was hiding something. It was the entire system. Lena knew that the Hale's disappearance had to be linked to something bigger, something that reached far beyond the police precinct. But the deeper she went, the more the investigation became a personal mission. The case was no longer just about solving a crime. It had become about exposing a deeply entrenched system of corruption and power. Detective Lena Ward had spent months unraveling the tangled web surrounding the disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hail. Every lead seemed to open up new questions. Every clue uncovered only deepened the mystery. But just when she thought she had reached the limits of what the investigation could reveal, an unexpected break in the case came through. A tip-off from an anonymous source that would change everything. Lena had been reviewing old police records, hoping to find something overlooked in previous investigations, when she stumbled upon a hidden folder, one that had been filed away under a different case number. It seemed insignificant at first, but the name on the cover page stopped her in her tracks. Evidence from March 18, 1973, Raymond Hail and Emily Hail. Inside the folder were photographs, crisp, clear, and unmistakable. They were taken the night of the disappearance, but they weren't part of the original investigation. The photos showed Raymond and Emily, not in the precinct, but in a small room at the back of the station. one that was rarely used and had been sealed off after renovations years ago. The photos were taken through a crack in the door, showing the two of them sitting together, both looking uncomfortable, perhaps even frightened. But it wasn't the photos themselves that caught Lena's attention. It was the man sitting across from them in the room. A man she recognized immediately. It was Officer John Mallory, a name Lena had come across before in her investigation. Mallory had been a relatively low-ranking officer at the time, but his name had been tied to multiple internal investigations for corruption. He had been dismissed from the force after a series of complaints had surfaced about his involvement with criminal groups, but no charges had ever been filed. Now, it seemed, Mallory was directly involved in the night of the Hale's disappearance. Lena's heart raced as she examined the photos. In one of them, Mallory was leaning over the table, speaking to Raymond in a low voice. In another, he was watching Emily with a cold, calculating stare. The tension in the room was palpable, and it was clear that something was happening behind closed doors. Something Lena had not been able to uncover until now. This revelation turned the entire investigation on its head. Mallory had been involved in the Hale's disappearance from the very beginning, and his presence in the precinct that night could not have been a coincidence. It was the break Lena had been waiting for, but it also raised even more questions. Why hadn't anyone mentioned Mallory's involvement before? Why had he been allowed to remain in the precinct, especially considering his past? Determined to follow this new lead, Lena tracked down people who had worked with Mallory in the years leading up to the disappearance. One retired officer recalled that Mallory had a particular interest in Raymond Hail's case. It seemed that Mallory had been involved in covering up other disappearances over the years, using his position in the police department to shield powerful individuals from scrutiny. And now, it appeared that Raymond and Emily had become part of that pattern. As Lena delved deeper into Mallory's history, she began to uncover disturbing connections. Mallory wasn't just working with small-time criminals. He was tied to the highest echelons of the criminal world. His ties to the mob had been more extensive than anyone had realized. It became increasingly clear that the Hale's disappearance was no accident. It had been orchestrated by a group of people who wanted to silence Raymond before he could testify against Duca and other corrupt figures. But even as Lena uncovered more about Mallory's involvement, she found that the truth was even more elusive than she had imagined. There were no official records of Mallory being in the precinct on the night of the disappearance. In fact, it appeared that he had been deliberately removed from the initial investigation, his name erased from the records. Lena's frustration grew as the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that there were far more people involved than she had originally thought. Mallory's role was just the tip of the iceberg. The truth was much bigger and far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. With each step forward, Lena realized that solving this case would mean taking on a system of corruption and power that had existed for years. But she was more determined than ever to find the truth, no matter the cost. As Detective Lena Ward dove deeper into the mysterious disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hail, one name kept surfacing: Vincent Duca, the powerful union boss who had ties to the city's most dangerous criminal syndicates, had been the target of Raymond's testimony before he vanished. Initially, the FBI had suspected that Duca's connections to the mob might have played a role in the disappearance, but as Lena continued her investigation, it became increasingly clear that the mob's involvement was more than just a possibility. It was the key to understanding the entire case. Raymond's decision to testify against Duca had set in motion a chain of events that would prove to be fatal. Duca had a reputation for eliminating threats to his operations, and Raymond had become one of those threats. But it wasn't just Duca who stood to benefit from Raymond's silence. It was the entire network of criminals tied to him. Lena uncovered old wiretap reports that revealed conversations between Duca and several members of the mob, discussing ways to deal with the loose end of Raymond's testimony. As she listened to the tapes, it was clear that Raymond's fate had been sealed long before he stepped foot into the police station. The more Lena dug, the more she discovered about the lengths to which Duca and his associates would go to protect their empire. They had influence within the police department, and with a few well-placed favors, they could make anyone disappear without a trace. The fact that the Hales vanished from a police station, a place meant to protect, was no accident. It was a calculated move to silence Raymond before he could expose the criminal network running rampant through the city. Lena knew now that the disappearance of the Hales was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. The deeper Detective Lena Ward ventured into the investigation, the more she uncovered about the disturbing underbelly of the police department. As she followed the trail of the Hales' disappearance, it became painfully clear that the corruption she had only suspected at the start was not just a few isolated incidents. It was systemic. The first signs of cover-up within the precinct were subtle, but undeniable. Officers who had been on duty the night Raymond and Emily vanished gave conflicting reports, and the records seemed intentionally vague. But as Lena dug deeper, she uncovered a disturbing pattern. Files had been erased, testimony altered, and evidence tampered with, all with the goal of hiding the truth. Lena's breakthrough came when she discovered a hidden set of internal investigation files, which detailed an ongoing probe into possible ties between certain officers and criminal organizations, including the mob. These files had been deliberately left off the public record, hidden away in the department's archives, and never brought to light during the official investigation. It wasn't just that the case had gone cold, it had been buried on purpose. Among these files was the name of Officer John Mallory, the man who had been present in the station when Raymond and Emily disappeared. Mallory's name had been conspicuously missing from the initial investigation reports, but Lena found references to him in several other cases of missing persons, all involving individuals who had either crossed paths with the mob or posed a threat to its operations. What made this revelation even more chilling was the discovery that Mallory had been protected by a group of high-ranking officers within the precinct. People who had ensured his ties to the criminal world remained hidden. Mallory wasn't acting alone. He was part of a larger network that spanned the department, a network willing to go to any lengths to ensure that certain people disappeared quietly, without a trace. As Lena pieced together the scope of this conspiracy, the magnitude of the cover-up became undeniable. It was clear that the precinct had been infiltrated by criminal elements, operating with impunity while hiding behind the badge. The Hales' disappearance wasn't an anomaly. It was just one more victim in a long line of crimes covered up by those sworn to protect the public. The more Lena uncovered, the more she realized that solving this case wasn't just about finding Raymond and Emily. It was about bringing an entire corrupt system to justice. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous the investigation became. Those in power weren't just trying to protect the truth. They were willing to kill to keep it hidden. After months of relentless investigation, Detective Lena Ward finally reached the tipping point. The tangled web of lies, corruption, and silence was beginning to unravel. The pieces of the puzzle that once seemed impossible to connect were now falling into place. And at the center of it all was a name that had haunted Lena from the beginning: Officer John Mallory. Mallory's role in the disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hail had been obscured for years, but Lena had uncovered a crucial piece of evidence that would change everything: a hidden audio recording. It was from a wiretap placed on a suspected criminal associate of Duca's, but it contained something far more explosive than anyone had expected. The recording revealed a conversation between Mallory and a senior officer within the department, discussing the Hales' disappearance in chilling detail. In the conversation, Mallory admitted to playing a key role in the night's events. He had personally escorted Raymond and Emily into the interrogation room, where they were held until they were quietly taken out of the building, never to be seen again. But what stunned Lena the most was the reason behind it. Mallory and the senior officer were acting under orders from Duca's criminal syndicate. They were not just protecting Raymond from the mob. They were silencing him permanently to prevent his testimony from reaching the courtroom. Lena's heart raced as the weight of the truth set in. Mallory had not acted alone. The corruption within the precinct had run so deep that even the highest officers were involved. Duca's ties to the department had allowed him to operate with impunity, pulling strings to eliminate threats whenever they arose. The Hales had been casualties in a much larger war, one that no one had ever seen. With the final pieces of the puzzle now revealed, Lena knew her next move would be the most dangerous yet. Exposing the truth would shake the entire system to its core. But she was ready, no matter the cost. The Hales deserved justice, and Lena would ensure that their voices were finally heard. After the final revelation, the truth about the disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hail hit the public like a storm. The shocking connection between Officer Mallory, the senior officers, and the criminal underworld sent shockwaves through the precinct. For the first time in decades, the corrupt ties between the police and the mob were laid bare for all to see. But the question remained: would justice be served, or would the case be silenced once again? Lena Ward's discovery had exposed the darkest corners of the police department, but the fight was far from over. The higher-ups in the department, those who had orchestrated the cover-up, were not going down without a fight. They had powerful allies, and even with the evidence Lena had uncovered, the battle for justice was just beginning. The public outrage was palpable, but there was still a deep fear within the precinct. Fear of retaliation, fear of the system turning against itself. Lena found herself at the heart of a storm she hadn't anticipated. Her life, once driven by a need to uncover the truth, was now at risk. Despite the overwhelming evidence, it wasn't guaranteed that those responsible would face the consequences of their actions. The legal system, much like the police force, was riddled with corruption, and Lena knew that the wheels of justice often turned slowly, if they turned at all. The Hales case had become a symbol of the deep-rooted corruption that had plagued the city for years. But the real question remained: would the system allow the truth to rise to the surface, or would the powerful forces at play silence it once more? As Lena stood in the courtroom, watching as the accused officers were finally brought to trial, a mixture of relief and uncertainty washed over her. The truth had come to light, but the road to true justice was far from over. For every victory, there were still countless hidden stories, countless untold truths. And as the gavel came down, Lena realized that the true battle had just begun. The case of Raymond and Emily Hail, a father and daughter who vanished into thin air, finally came to light after decades of silence. The shocking revelations exposed a deep web of corruption and criminal ties that spanned both the police force and the mob. Detective Lena Ward's relentless pursuit of the truth brought to the surface what was once buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and lies. While justice was served in the courtroom, the investigation revealed something more: an entrenched system of silence and power that controlled the fate of the most vulnerable. The Hail story was not just about a father and daughter who disappeared. It was a symbol of the many others who had fallen victim to a corrupt system, never to be heard from again. But for Lena, the fight was far from over. With every case she solved, she knew there were more secrets waiting to be uncovered. This case was a reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface. But justice? That's something that must be fought for, one case at a time. Subscribe to Untold Secrets Daily for more spine-chilling investigations, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.